3, 2.
And welcome everyone to the Real Leaders podcast with Keys from keynote speakers here at the Agents of Change Summit. I'm your host, Kevin Edwards. Joining us today is Jud Brewer, the Director of Research and Innovation at the Mindfulness Center and the founder of MindSciences. Jud, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
So when I found out that I was going to be interviewing you, I was thinking about habits. And the first quote that popped into my head was, seek first to understand and then be understood. So Jud, the first question I have for you today is, what hypothesis did you seek and what do you understand about how habits are formed in our brain?
Yeah, the hypothesis that I sought was like, what makes people tick? Why do people struggle with behavior change, and why is it so hard for them to change behavior? So the hypothesis was, let's understand how people's minds work and then help them work with them.
So explain to our viewers how the average habit is formed.
It's actually a relatively simple process. There are 3 core steps: a trigger, a behavior, and a reward or a result. So if we see food, that's the trigger. We eat the food, that's the behavior. And then our stomach sends this dopamine signal to our brain that says, remember what you ate and where you found it. So that's an evolutionarily conserved process that's set up to help us remember where food is. Yet in modern day, we use it for everything from stress eating to smoking to anxiety.
Okay, so that's the next question I want to ask you is, what's the difference between like a habit that's formed and addiction? So to me, how I have had addiction explained is a repetitive, compulsive use of a substance despite adverse consequences. So I could be addicted to caffeine or apples, but I'm not going to lie about it or cheat about it or anything like that. So maybe explain to our audience about what addiction means to you and what's its role in habit formation.
Yeah, as an addiction psychiatrist, I learned in my residency training the simple the simple definition of continued use despite adverse consequences. So it sounds very similar to yours.
Okay.
So whatever we're doing, it could be our smartphone, it could be food, it could be cigarettes. If it's continued use despite adverse consequences to the point where like we can't stop ourselves from doing it, it likely falls into the addiction category. This is also, you can think of texting while driving is now more dangerous than drunk driving.
Sure. Yeah.
So there's a continued use where people can't stop themselves from texting while they're driving despite adverse consequences, car accidents.
Okay, interesting. So along this journey, like what's the type of research that you've been doing and what are some examples that come to your mind that could really help our viewers change their habit formation?
We started with really trying to understand how people's minds worked, and this is actually where it came back to some of these old theories around operant conditioning or positive and negative reinforcement. It turns out that it actually goes all the way back to some ancient Buddhist psychology from 2,500 years ago where they were describing the same thing that folks like B.F. Skinner and other behaviorists were describing in the 50s. Seems to have gotten lost somewhere because I'd learned about it in college but didn't really think that much of it until I was really struggling to help my patients in my clinic. And I was like, wait a minute, this explains so much from eating when we're stressed as compared to when we're hungry, to taking pills to numb our emotional or physical pain, to looking at cute pictures of puppies on Instagram when we're bored. All that's at play. So once we kind of identified that, we looked to see what could actually target this very, very specifically. And this is where it actually comes down to something really, really simple, which is awareness. And what that suggests is that actually awareness can trump things like self-control. Self-control is based on the youngest and the weakest part of our brain. It goes offline when we get stressed. We can't trust it to change behavior, because if we could, then we would all just change our behaviors. The obesity epidemic wouldn't be an epidemic. The opioid epidemic wouldn't be an epidemic. We would just tell ourselves to stop and we would stop. But in fact, we're not looking at how our brains work. So if we can actually move from willpower into actually tapping into this really strong reward-based learning system, we can help people change behavior that way. So I'll give you an example.
Yeah, please.
In some of our smoking studies. So we got 5 times the quit rates of gold standard treatment with helping people pay attention to their behavior and then also bring in some simple mindfulness practices to work with cravings. And the way we do that is we have them pay attention as they smoke, and they realize that smoking doesn't taste very good. That taps into that core reward-based learning system because the reward is what drives future behavior. And if it's not rewarding, that reward value drops, and so they stop. It's much easier for them to change the behavior. We found we can actually build some of these tools right into our digital therapeutics where we can deliver this stuff through apps. And within 10 to 15 uses of these craving tools, we call them, we see that reward value significantly drop and it helps people really change their behavior.
Okay, so awareness will trump this
Self-control.
Self-control. Okay, and these reward-based. Okay, so what about in different communities? I mean, is there a difference between people in lower socioeconomic areas that might have more difficulties changing their behavior based off of this awareness and the surrounding elements?
Yeah, it's a really good question. In work led by Ashley Mason at UCSF, they found that these app-based digital therapeutics work across sociodemographic boundaries. So there's no, it works for this group and not this group.
Doesn't
because
discriminate.
we all share the same reward-based learning systems. The environment might be different, but the same habit loop is still there for everyone.
Are there any biological factors where someone might be more prone to becoming an addict?
Certainly, I think people have some genetic predispositions where they might be more likely to get caught up in craving than others. The thing is, we can't really change those genetics, so we can actually target the process that they are affecting, which is this reward-based learning system.
Okay, so this awareness factor, you mentioned when someone's smoking a cigarette, you said just think about how it tastes. What about some other different factors, such as opioid use, or people that don't really realize that they have a problem with drinking? What type of people do you need in your life? Do you need a support system that can come in? I mean, not everyone can go see a doctor every single day.
Right.
What would you do?
Right, and that's actually why we developed these digital therapeutics.
okay.
I realized that people don't learn to smoke in my office, they don't learn to stress eat in my office, they don't learn to use opioids in my office. So if we're actually trying to treat them in my office, we're treating them outside of their context. So can we actually bring my office, package it into package this evidence-based training into a digital therapeutic and deliver it to them, so they can start to work with these triggers and work with their habit loops in context.
Okay, so in theory, are you replacing that habit with this digital habit as well, this digital platform habit?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, because so many people are addicted to their smartphones, we're helping them replace it with something that's intrinsic, something that isn't based in a phone, something isn't based outside of them, but actually that's based right inside of them. And what we find is that curiosity and kindness are intrinsic to all of us. We just have to dust them off and warm them up and use them a little bit, because often we forget what it's like to be curious. But curiosity actually feels much better than a craving, for example. Kindness feels much better than judging ourselves or judging other people. And so we can help I think of this as helping people find that bigger, better offer. So if kindness is a bigger, better offer than self-judgment, and they can see that clearly, then that's going to start to drive a new behavior, a new habit of being kind to ourselves and being kind to others. Same for curiosity. If we indulge a craving and we realize we get this brief relief by smoking a cigarette or overeating or eating a donut or whatever, and we realize we can actually be curious about that craving itself, and the curiosity itself feels good, and it also feels good not to overeat or not to eat a bunch of junk food. Those old habits get replaced with these bigger, better offers that actually lead to healthier and happier lives.
Okay, and the app is called what for our viewers? Is it MindScience or?
I have a bunch of resources on my website, drjud.com, drjud.com, but we've got 3 apps. One's called Crave and Equip for smoking, Eat Right Now for eating, for stress and emotional eating and overeating, and then Unwinding Anxiety for anxiety.
Okay, great. And then this is going to take a lot of leadership to really be an agent of change, to change people's habits formation and sustain that, where we see with the crack epidemic, now with the opioid epidemic. What type of leadership is needed from industry leaders, from people like yourselves, other doctors in your community to take this on?
I think we need, enlightened leaders where they're really seeing really clearly what the problems are and are not just trying to, force solutions that they think are best onto people, but really go into the communities, understand what the needs are, and also understand how people's minds work. If they can really understand, if they can start by understanding their own minds, they'll be able to empathize with others and understand how their minds work. And on an individual level, that will help them really be able to lead effectively.
Well, I'm excited to see this play out, especially within the workspace. Just me being some of the person that can easily get addicted to going on their emails and being aware of my choices and decisions. Just been a pleasure having you on the show today. The last question I have for you today is, what is your definition of a real leader?
What's my definition of a real leader? That's a great question. The word humility comes to mind. So I mean, there's so many different qualities probably for a real leader, but I would say if they're not, if they don't have humility as a foundation, I think it would be tough to be a real leader.
Well, Jud, appreciate you coming on the show. Talked about a lot today. Talked about the formation of habits. What is addiction? What is not addiction? Are all addictions bad? The power of awareness today, and then wrapped up with your definition of a leader. So just want to thank you for coming on the show today. For Dr. Jud Brewer, I'm Kevin Edwards, asking you to go out there, have some humility, and always, folks, keep it real. Thanks, Jud. Appreciate you.
Thank you.